Hi, I'm Don Chadwick. I am an industrial designer. I live and work in West Los Angeles. And you are watching a student's perspective.
Okay.
Hi there, and thanks for tuning in to A Student's Perspective, the weekly series that connects students with designers, manufacturers, educators, industry professionals, and design media celebrities to hear their stories on just how they've gotten to where they are now. Through our conversations, we connect the past, present, and future of design to show just how much we can learn from each other to grow towards our fullest potential without prescribed limitations. Think of A Student's Perspective as a weekly design lecture series from the student's point of view. A Student's Perspective is a division of the nonprofit University Hall of Innovation, whose goals are to connect students with the design industry through design challenges and mentorship, and a collaboration with the Marywood University Interior Architecture Program in Scranton, Pennsylvania. All interviews can be found in their video format at www.astudentsperspective.tv. For more information or sponsorship inquiries, please contact universityhallofinnovation@gmail.com.
Okay. Hi, I'm Bianca Bancheri, and you are watching another episode of A Student's Perspective. I am here with Don Chadwick. So Don, would you like to maybe elaborate a little bit on your career background and even your education background, if you'd like?
Sure. As I mentioned earlier in the intro, I was educated in industrial design at UCLA here in West Los Angeles. Upon graduation, I went to work in an architectural office, Victor Gruen Associates, and I was in the graphic design department. And I was there for about 3 years, working mostly on graphics for shopping centers and doing interior work. But I always had a very strong interest in furniture design. So after I left the Gruen office, I started my own little studio doing graphic design, and on the side, I was designing furniture. And I was able, over a year or two, to enter competitions and won various awards and got published. And several years after that, I wrote a letter to Herman Miller introducing myself, and they were interested, and they sent the head of design out to interview me, I guess you would say, and we clicked together, and a couple of years after that, I was able to design the first product for Herman Miller called the Chadwick Modular Seating. And that really started my career with Herman Miller, and I've been involved with them since then, on and off, plus working with another, now no longer a competitor, Knoll. So I've had fairly broad experience working with two of the major modern furniture manufacturers.
So you did mention that you started in a firm. I'm really curious to know how you shifted from, well, I guess what drove your shift from the firm of such large scale projects to very specific intricate furniture pieces?
Well, starting off in furniture design is not an easy endeavor. And it really just took my own initiative and belief in myself that I was going to be able to create and develop ideas that were workable and understandable to a major manufacturer. I had always had a very strong interest as a younger fellow with building scale models. So I was very strong in hand skills. So I knew how to convey ideas three-dimensionally in the way of models, and I photographed the models, and So my communication skills, I think, were fairly well developed after working at the architectural firm.
So, as students, I think it's really important for us to understand, I guess, like the process of this creativity. So I am curious to know, you have a lot of pieces that are all unique, and then you have the more traditional office pieces that are very popular. So we can start by just maybe talking a little bit about a few of your pieces if you want to. Maybe even mention your favorite if you like, if you have one.
I don't have a favorite. You're trying to bait me into talking about the Aeron chair. I mean, it's very successful, but I have a lot of favorites. I think a good amount of the work that I did for Herman Miller, I would say they're all very favorable to me.
Mhm. So you have the Aeron chair, you have the Equa chair. I'm not sure if I mispronounced that. I'm sorry if I did.
Equa, Equa.
Um, Equa. So you have those, and then you have like this really interesting spark chair, and
Yeah.
all of the complete shift of I guess design style. So how did that shift occur? Is this something that you just were there was like criteria that you had to meet and then you fulfilled that, or was it more like, okay, this is I would love to have a little bit of a different perspective?
Well, both actually.
Okay.
There were some criteria, but the emphasis for me has always been on new technology and developing uh, and conceptualizing ideas based on certain technologies that are either just evolving or in some cases early in my early years they hadn't evolved enough to get involved with production, but I always had a very strong curiosity about industrial methodologies and how they can be used to uh, manufacture furniture, basically. And a lot of those new technologies enabled me and others to really bring our ideas to fruition and sometimes break new ground. And that was the hope.
Yeah, absolutely. We as students, I think we have a little bit of a tough time going back and forth between because technology has always been around for us. We have a tough time going back to paper, and sometimes we have to think, well, maybe we don't always have to do that. Maybe it's a part of the design, of course, but I think the hands-on and having the technology is really beneficial as well. So it's interesting that you've kept up with it so consistently.
Yes, I mean that was something. Maybe I acquired that curiosity as a young kid. I don't know how, but I've always been very interested in how things work and how they're put together and how they're made. Uh, in fact, I didn't mention that, but part of my background is teaching. I did teach design at UCLA from I think 1977 through 1986, and one of the courses that I taught was titled Industrialized Materials, and basically that was introducing students to the processes that were available at that time on producing a variety of products, everything from corrugated cardboard to molded plastic parts to wheelchairs. I mean, Los Angeles at that time had a number of manufacturing facilities within the city, so I could take the students on field trips so they could actually visualize and encounter the production of certain products. They didn't have to be furniture per se, but just understanding how a material could be used in an industrial process. So, because I've always felt in order to be a good designer, you have to understand how things are made and what
Absolutely.
materials are available for you.
Absolutely. That's really important. I feel like it's amazing that you did that for your students, because it's important for us to see this construction and like experience it fully, instead of just being on a pen and paper or behind a computer, and we're designing it. We know the facts about it, but we haven't fully experienced the material itself. So it's really amazing that you gave them that opportunity.
Yes,
Yeah.
because I mean, that was always something for me to discover, and I felt it was an important thing to pass on to students.
Absolutely. And that's really evident in a lot of your pieces, especially there's like there's a few that are like noticeably, it's you use the material to its most benefit, and not just the chairs that we talked about before, but like it's amazing that you can take those opportunities with the pieces and make even more out of it than simply what it could have been without taking advantage of the materials.
Yeah, well, in the case of particularly Herman Miller, they have a history, particularly with designers like Charles Eames and George Nelson, of really experimenting and taking risk. I would say maybe more so with the Eames, Charles and Ray Ames, that they experimented on a number of processes. I'm sure you're very familiar with them, but having that tradition within Herman Miller kind of pushes, at the time I was a younger designer, but pushes you to try and follow in the steps of these other designers. I mean, they were people you looked up to and you studied their work, and that helped stimulate somebody like myself to go out there and take a risk and see what happens.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So as for inspiration, I'm curious to know, maybe like I just want to talk a little bit about your pieces, because I think that for students it's really important to see, where that inspiration came from. So I would love to talk about your the Chadwick modular chair, if you don't mind. Maybe just
Sure.
give like just a few maybe a little explanation about where that inspiration came from, because that is a very unique piece.
Well, that was built around a new process at the time. Um, it was developed mostly in Europe and in Italy, but Herman Miller brought the process in-house, and it's the ability to inject foam into a mold and encapsulate an internal structure. So the incentive there was to have a one-piece section that was made up of different parts, obviously, so that you could uh, uh, apply the seating, the modular seating, in a variety of configurations. I was kind of moving against the typical rectangular application of lounge. This was kind of in the category of lounge seating. So it was kind of breaking down the formality or the rectilinear aspects of normal lounge seating. So I came up with the idea of these different wedge shapes to allow you to develop curvilinear solutions, which actually, in my mind, would help maybe the whole social interaction of people sitting around. That there was another aspect to just the design itself, that it kind of enticed or brought together more potential conversation just because of the way people are seated. It was a little bit like when you remember I remember old restaurants had booths,
Yeah.
and you'd get into the booth and you'd be kind of around a table, and that stimulated the conversation. So that was part of the aspect of the design, was to bring more socialization to lounge areas.
Absolutely.
But the design itself was based on this molded foam process that allowed you to to come up with that form.
Yeah, I appreciated it because I feel like it's really clear that the interaction of that sort of space, what that creates at least, is very different from an average setting of any room that it's placed in. I feel like you just to be able to interact in that way. And when you said booths, it clicked immediately because I was just somewhere with my friends where we went out to the diner together and we immediately went for a booth, not a table, because even though there's a very large group of us, we would rather squeeze into the booth and have that close interaction. So yeah, I really appreciated that piece. So, and that also, you have a quote. I'll read it off because I loved it. I wrote it down. If you're not always looking at things and looking at them differently with an overall curiosity, you're no longer a designer. And I think that being able to see things in that way is, it definitely keeps us moving as students. I think that it's just you saying that as a designer who is very well established. It gives us maybe a little bit of an eye opener.
Well, I also like to use a camera, and George Nelson wrote about that. How to look at things.
Right.
And I think when you're using a camera, or maybe today it's it's an iPhone or something comparable, it trains your eye. It forces you to look at things in a certain way or a different way. And when you're out in the world and whether you're traveling or even within the city like Los Angeles, there are so many things to look at. And having that visual vocabulary of just stuff helps generate ideas. And you're never going to or invent things from the ground up, although that's always the hope. But you like it or not, you do tend to borrow from things you've seen in the past, and you understand it helps develop not only your visual intelligence, but it helps develop your social understanding, if you're like in the case of that modular seating.
Right. Yeah. So I definitely appreciated that, and you elaborating on it even was even more refreshing because we are constantly not just experiencing things right now. We are experiencing quite a bit from our phones, but now that we are able to go out after all of the madness that we had go on, we do look at things with fresh eyes, and it's really refreshing to be able to go out and find inspiration in anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm gonna bring up again, when I was teaching, I gave the students a project to design a container that you could reuse once you've used it for the original purpose. And this was back probably in the late 70s or early 80s. I took them to a large dump up here in the Santa Monica Mountains. I wanted them to see firsthand what gets buried every day from human trash. Just take a look at it and see what's getting thrown out every day. And this was, an early idea about recycling.
Yeah.
But having the students there to not only see it, but smell it and understand what we throw away every day makes you think about what you're designing and how you design it.
Absolutely.
So that's part of being there.
Yes. It's part of experiencing it, and it's right in your face. You can walk away if you want to, but it's
Yeah.
the experience itself really can take you back. So that talking about sustainability, there are quite a few articles about your focus on sustainability in manufacturing. Do you want to talk a little bit about that too?
Sure. As you may know, with the Aeron chair, Herman Miller has been able to replace certain parts on the newest version of the Aeron chair with plastic that they call it ocean-bound plastic. In other words, plastic that before it finds its way into the ocean, it's been retrieved and recycled. And I think more and more furniture manufacturers are paying attention to this, not just Herman Miller. I think most of them, because it's an important thing to talk about, because there's so much plastic being used in furniture today. And so a good amount, not all, but a good amount of the molded plastic in the Aeron chair is what is derived from ocean-bound plastic. And I think as we move more into newer products, we're going to have to be very careful on what materials we choose. And that may affect design in many ways. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I'm nervous and excited at the same time to see how that goes. Especially because it's exciting because you can actually experiment with new things that we didn't think to actually use before. But nervous because who knows how it's gonna go. So for other pieces, you mentioned one, of course, that had like sustainable aspects. For other pieces, was this an opportunity as well to focus on sustainability?
Absolutely. I think so that we've been working on ever really since the COVID-19 pandemic. We've been really focusing more on ideas that are centered around more sustainable materials like wood and metal, and trying to push the technology of how you can use wood and how you can form it. And as you may be well aware of, a lot of the Scandinavian furniture has always focused on wood and how to mold it and how to shape it. And we've been exploring all of those technologies of how do you take a wood product and sustainable wood, and use it in such a way that you are, pushing the technology of how to work with wood.
Absolutely. We had an opportunity to work with wood, and it was plywood. And it was a project completely designed off of one sheet of plywood. And that was it was an interesting opportunity because it makes you think about how much material you're using and how you can actually make the most of it with much less waste. So it's just exciting to talk about different opportunities that we can actually use. Design is endless. I think that's why everybody can gravitate to it in one way or another. So it's really interesting to see different aspects of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to go back, maybe just a little jump back to starting up, because I feel like as students, we are very curious about the startup and maybe how your opportunities came about and, how you decided on those.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I was when I started my own little studio after I left the architectural office, I had certain ideas I wanted to develop in the way of furniture design. And since I had the skills of building scale models, I went ahead and just developed ideas and built scale models, photographed them, and certain magazines and even built prototypes, actually, not just scale models, but full-size prototypes. And so certain magazines, like there was a magazine called Industrial Design. It doesn't exist anymore, but you may have it in your library. And they would have a design competition every year, and I entered and was picked, a number of times, so that I got published basically. And then we had another I would call it a competition sponsored by the Pasadena Museum of Art. They had every 3 years a competition to enter design, and it covered a broad array from textiles to ceramics. It wasn't just furniture, but I entered furniture, and they would have an exhibition. So and a catalog. So I was able to again have my work published. And with that as a kind of a background, I started pursuing first local manufacturers here in Los Angeles. But one thing led to another, and my eyes were on a greater prize, let's say. And I befriended, at the time, a showroom manager for Knoll. And over the years, I would actually show him things, and it turned out he left the local showroom here in Los Angeles and became president of Knoll. This was back in the 60s into the 70s, and one particular project that I showed them involved a process called rotational molding, and it's pretty common today, but at the time it was really a process that was used by the defense industry to mold very large containers. And the process, if you can, and they're hollow shaped, so that enabled me to develop a chair that was one piece but hollow, so you could develop a lot of, and now that process is used quite a bit, particularly in Italy. And I showed that project to Knoll, and they were interested enough to pay for a tool to mold some chairs, but unfortunately the process wasn't refined enough to have a part that was really producible aesthetic wise. It still had some issues, but that kind of started me with working with a major manufacturer. And then after that, as I said, I wrote a letter to the head of design at Herman Miller. This was around 1970, and he was going to Switzerland to run their international organization, and he said he would come back. He's going to come back in a year, and he would contact me. Well, he did, and he came out to my little office here in Los Angeles, along with a person who was kind of a liaison between the Eanes office and Herman Miller. And so I had a conversation, I showed them some things, and they decided to give me an assignment to design some lounge furniture. So I did that, but it turned out that those pieces, for whatever reasons, they didn't want to, produce them, but that one thing led to another, and that's where I developed the idea, because I found out about this foam molding process, and that's when I developed the modular seating. And that's how I really got started in a major manufacturer who was producing, worldwide.
Wow.
And that was really my beginning, and one thing led to another after that.
That's a lot of opportunity, I feel like all at once almost. That just kind
Yeah.
of Yeah. But it's
But
amazing.
it took a lot of work. It took a lot of risk taking. It took a lot of perseverance.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like as designers, it's an exciting process, but it can be a difficult process. Did you face any struggles throughout your career with?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. You get. You don't always. You're very fortunate if you have a product that finds its way into production, and then if it becomes successful. I mean, I've had a number of things that went into production, and for whatever reason, they're not being produced anymore.
Yeah. I think it's important for us to see, that coming from somebody who has all of these pieces that are amazing, and um then you can see, not everything actually does go through, and that's okay. And it doesn't mean you stop your designing and you think of something else. You just keep moving. So
Yes, you have to.
absolutely, it's really important for us as students to understand that and see that.
Yeah, don't. If you believe in yourself and you believe in the ideas that you're developing, you have to just push them,
Absolutely.
and you have to be a good communicator on how to, get these ideas understood and hopefully produced.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think that's gonna be something that is gonna force us to actually come out of our shells a little bit as well as students. I think just believing in yourself and knowing, okay, this, I know this is worth something, so I'm gonna make it happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
For, um. So you didn't say that you had favorite pieces, but do you want to maybe run through just a few of your pieces to familiarize the people watching of maybe a few things that you designed?
Well, obviously, the first one of any major consequence is the modular seating, which was I started working on that in 1972. It was introduced in 1974 at Neocon in Chicago. So that was my first encounter with Neocon. Uh, a number of years after that, because I did get involved with another Herman Miller designer by the name isn't Bill Stumpf,
Okay.
and we collaborated on a project together, trying to design the office of the future. And it was a very broad project, also for Herman Miller. In fact, Bill Stumpf designed a chair called Ergon. If you look that up, in fact, that also involved molded foam, but very different. It was an office chair. So uh, anyhow, we were asked to work together to collaborate to try to come up with what we thought would be the new office. And we developed a lot of ideas, models, full-size mock-ups, but Herman Miller decided not to pursue that because it was just too involved for them. But Bill and I decided to develop our seating idea, which eventually became Equa.
Okay.
And so that was the next major design that I was involved with, Equa. And then after that, well, in a way became the first, because we collaborated again on the Aeron chair. And that started in 1990, basically. And Aeron was introduced in 1994 at a furniture fair in Germany called Orgatech. In between, we had a lot of different ideas that we promoted to Herman Miller. And after that, I got involved with Knoll and worked on an office chair called the Chadwick chair, which also involved suspensions on the seat in the back. And after that, I was asked to, we looked at what would potentially be outdoor seating. And I think that led to the Spark Share series for Knoll as well. So, and now we are working on the next one, and very different. I've had a younger designer working in my studio for a number of years, and he brought in one of those exercise balls. People were sitting on them in their office.
Yeah.
So based on that idea, we developed a product called Ballo,
Mm-hmm.
and that's made by Humanscale. But the whole idea behind that is that it helps you exercise while you're sitting. It instills body movement, so you don't become sedentary. So that was it's had limited distribution, but I think it's a strong idea, and it's still on the marketplace. But we're also working on another product with them currently that should be introduced later this year.
Oh, that's exciting.
And I think that pretty well covers the major pieces.
Yeah.
There were others. I did a freestanding desk system for Herman Miller that goes back to the 1980s, but it only was in production for maybe eight or 10 years. So I think that the greater successes have been seating products primarily, and that's where I've really focused.
Mm-hmm.
They're the most challenging.
Yeah, they definitely are. I used the Ballo actually as an inspiration for a product that we designed for our furniture studio, and it was to help kids with ADHD try to focus in class. So it had like an incorporated movement. It was like trying to create that same movement in what would traditionally be a sedentary position. But so for you kind of touched on it a little bit, but you didn't say it directly, but your focus on seating and the way that the experiencer is in the chairs. So for ergonomics, do you want to maybe talk a little bit about, you have been named an ergonomics expert. So do you want to maybe talk a little bit about how you incorporate that?
Well, it's a prerequisite.
Okay.
Anything that I work on, we have to consider the human form, right, and how you're supporting that form. And if the solution requires movement, that what we call kinematics, that plays an important part in the case of like the Aeron chair, how the tilt works, how it requires that you keep your feet on the floor as you recline in the chair, and how you're supported throughout that movement. And over the years, we've also worked with specialists who are more specialized than we are as designers, who develop ideas for particularly supporting the spine. And so as you know, on the Aeron chair, it's gone through various versions of what they call posture fit. And that idea was developed by a chiropractor who had a back injury, and he had to, work out something for himself, and he became highly specialized, and he's consulted or did consult with Herman Miller on a variety of their office chairs. So I learned quite a bit from him. And Bill Stumpf studied ergonomics in graduate school, so I learned some things from him. So the knowledge that I have, I've acquired through other people who studied it, but it's an important part of whatever we work on today, that whatever kind of seating it is, it has to properly support the user. And so we don't just design for design's sake. We design with a purpose of providing seating that is going to be comfortable and supportive at the same time.
Absolutely.
That involves ergonomics.
Even in like pieces with like the Spark chair, I do love the Spark chair because you like can't help but to appreciate that it's so functional, and so it's lightweight as well, and it's genuinely comfortable for a seat that you would expect that a stackable seat would not be comfortable, but it's you can't help but to appreciate that you've incorporated that and given that open
Yeah,
that.
well, we studied the contours of the seat in the back and what the seat angles are, the back angles, and for the type of use it would require. And you're right, a lot of stacking chairs just aren't very comfortable at all. Just design stack, and that's about it.
Right.
So we paid a lot of attention to the contours and the angles of that chair.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very noticeable too, even just looking as we did quite a bit of experimenting with that in our furniture studio as well. And to see something like that is, you can't help but to appreciate it. So I have just a general question. So for students, do you have any advice for us? Or is there anything that when you taught, you did give a little piece of advice to your students?
Oh, yeah. I would advise them to take chances, to be curious, to get out and look at things and understand, educate yourself. You're going to learn a lot outside the classroom. You have to have an initiative and go out in the field, look at articles, educate yourself beyond what you're learning in school. I mean, and prepare yourself for a career.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that we are trying to kind of incorporate that in not just our study of design, but also we want to know, how to really prepare yourself for a career fully. And do you have any advice for that as well, maybe?
Well, yes, I would say have a good portfolio.
Okay.
I mean, back when I developed my portfolio, it was mostly slides of models that I had made or slides of drawings that I had made, so having a good visual portfolio plus your verbal communication skills should be of great help.
Yeah, absolutely.
And your I think it's good to study the language of design. I would call it kind of the design rhetoric, being able to describe things in the proper terms and show that you understand what you've designed and how you designed it. And it's just that you don't expect just to place your portfolio of ideas in front of somebody and let it speak for itself, because you are the designer and you have to communicate those ideas.
Absolutely. And you mentioned communication quite a few times, and I feel that that's also a really important piece, because that's a huge part of design, is speaking to people, making those connections, and trying to not just present yourself and your work, but having those connections so that you can further them if you ever need to.
Well, you have to have connections.
Right.
We wouldn't have an Aeron chair if I hadn't made connections with certain companies that specialized in certain processes. This went beyond Herman Miller. I had to do it on my own.
Absolutely.
So that's where I say you need to really develop a knowledge of sources. because even a manufacturer such as a Herman Miller, they may not know everything.
Right.
But if they're willing to hear and listen and understand, you can educate them as well.
Yeah, of course. So as for your connection with Bill Stumpf, I feel like maybe just if you'd like to touch on that, we do quite a bit of collaborative work in our classes. So how did you find success in these collaborative works? Did you do more like you had your own brainstorms and then you came together, or was it more all in one and then you kind of dispersed from there?
Well, we worked separately. Bill was located in first in Wisconsin, then in Minnesota. And we would come visit at our respective studios. So we would travel back and forth. We even had such a thing called a fax machine very early, so we could transmit sketches and ideas. And we would meet, in the case of, with Herman Miller, we would also meet at their facilities back in Western Michigan. So it involved a lot of travel as well. But when we got together, we would exchange ideas and as well. But we were always in communication with each other, and we just seemed to able to mesh our strengths together. And the relationship would work well, and then it soured, and then it would work well. So it just depends. We were very different, of different backgrounds, different personalities. Physically, we were very different. But we worked well together. We stimulated each other, and that's what's important.
Absolutely. And it shows in your pieces, all of the pieces that you've, collaborated with, and even moving forward, it was great that you had the opportunity to learn from each other as well.
Yeah.
That's really, as designers, it's, we, even in our studio that we have now, it's a collaborative space. You learn from each other just as much as you learn from your professors.
Yeah.
Because you get to see all of those new designs and ideas that you wouldn't have thought of yourself, but now you can run with that and go even further with it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I guess we do have a final question that we ask all of our interviewees is, so if you were able to go back in time and give your student self maybe a piece of advice, what would that be?
If I were to go back in time, I would have probably told myself to try and work in a design office. Now, first of all, I want to tell you, when I was at UCLA and I was in the industrial design program, we used to have a mentor who came, his name was Henry Dreyfus. I don't know if that's a name that you can look it up, but he had a very well-known industrial design office. But they design mostly product design, like telephones and kitchen appliances. I think they even did some initial work with John Deere. And one of the people that worked in there was Niels Diffrian. If you maybe have heard of him, but he really was, he published a book called Humanscale, and maybe you have that in your library. When I saw the kind of work that they did, it kind of turned me away from what they were doing. I was more interested in I guess, design that started from the ground up, from the inside out. I was not interested in designing the surrounding of something, the case, or whatever it is. I was more interested in the totality of it. So if I wish I had had a little more working experience, whether it was in that architectural office or some other office, before I went on my own. So I may have left a little early. So I would suggest for students to try and get as much experience under your belt working in a small, preferably a smaller office, where you have more responsibility and you're able to understand the whole process of how a design office works. Because I had to discover a lot of that on my own, and you make a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially if you're trying to navigate that, you know, on your own and without too much prior knowledge about it. That's a good piece of advice, I think, especially because a lot of people kind of lean towards their own private practice right away. And I think that's really important to consider, maybe starting small and in a small firm and working your way up to that.
Yeah.
That's a good advice, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. Thank you everybody for watching, and thank you for the conversation. That was absolutely wonderful. So this was a student's perspective. If you like this episode, give it a like, comment, and a share, and tune in next week for the continuation of the conversation.